Catherine Reed was accustomed to walking into rooms and commanding attention. But that evening, as she stepped into her daughter's nursery, she froze. There on the cream-colored carpet lay a man she barely knew. A man with the weathered posture of a soldier, the rough edges of a life lived hard, and the gentlest smile she'd ever seen as he slept. Between his protective arms, her twin baby girls were curled up fast asleep, as if the world outside didn't exist. For the first time in years, neither did her walls. Rain streaked the tall windows of the Westwood estate, each drop catching the soft amber glow of the driveway lamps. Catherine Westwood stepped from her black sedan, the sound of her heels immediately muted by the heavy downpour. She hadn't planned to be home this early. The final meeting in Chicago had been unexpectedly canceled, and instead of spending another night at her hotel, she'd taken the first flight back. She told herself it was just to check in, to ensure the new nanny had things under control. But deep down, she missed her children in a way she rarely admitted, even to herself. Inside, the house was still, not the emptiness of abandonment, but the deep, velvety quiet of a home settled for the night. Her executive assistant had already gone home. The night staff maintained their respectful distance. Catherine moved down the long marble hall toward the west wing, her heels clicking in a measured rhythm against the polished stone. As she passed the kitchen, the faint scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, mingled with something else, laundry detergent, clean and comforting. The twins' bedroom was at the far end of the hallway. She reached for the brass handle, hesitated for a heartbeat, then turned it slowly. The door opened with the slightest creak. Warm, golden light spilled from the bedside lamp, and the gentle patter of rain against the window filled the space. What she saw next stopped her breath. On the floor between the twin beds lay Mason Hall. His tall frame was curled protectively, just enough to fit beneath the shared blanket covering him and the two small bodies beside him. One arm draped over the children, his hand resting lightly on the back of the smaller twin. The other child's tiny fingers clutched tightly to the fabric of his sleeve. Their faces, peaceful and slack with sleep, pressed into the warmth of the blanket. The air was thick with the mingled scent of rain-damp clothes and the faint sweetness of baby shampoo. Mason's hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly before exhaustion finally claimed him. His breathing was deep and steady. His face in repose carried lines that spoke of years spent seeing too much and saying too little. His uniform jacket was folded neatly at the foot of one bed, leaving him in a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. His boots were placed side by side, laces tucked in, a soldier's habit he'd never abandoned. Catherine's first reaction was confusion. Why was he here? Mason was the night security guard, not the nanny. She had never authorized him to be anywhere near her children's bedroom, let alone asleep on the floor with them. A flash of irritation prickled at her, the same reflex she had toward any breach of her strict household protocols. But before she could summon the will to wake him, something in the scene held her still. The children. They were relaxed in a way she rarely saw. Even with the best nannies money could buy, bedtime had always been a struggle. Especially after the accident, they woke often, restless and sometimes crying out. But now both were wrapped around this man as if he were the anchor in their small, uncertain world. And he was lying there, not on a guest chair or leaning against the wall, but on the hard floor, sharing their thin blanket. She stepped inside quietly, her designer heels sinking into the plush rug. The closer she got, the more she noticed. The twins' breathing matched his, a perfect, unspoken rhythm. The tension she had grown accustomed to seeing in their little bodies was gone. She thought she saw the faintest smile tug at the corner of Mason's mouth as one of the twins murmured something in her sleep. Catherine had met Mason only a few weeks earlier when her head of security recommended him for the night shift. A veteran, they'd said, with a clean record and an unshakable sense of duty. She had barely spoken to him, just enough to note that he was polite, concise, and kept his eyes respectfully lowered. He was here to work, nothing more. And yet, here he was. Her mind flickered through possibilities. Had something happened? Did the nanny leave early? Was one of the twins sick? But no, the soft rise and fall of their chests told her they were fine. It was something else, something that didn't fit neatly into a column on a staff report, and that unsettled her. She lingered at the doorway, torn between waking him and letting the moment stretch. The rain outside deepened, a steady percussion against the glass, and she found herself unwilling to break the fragile bubble of peace in the room. Mason shifted slightly, tucking the blanket closer around the smaller twin without opening his eyes. His hand lingered there, protective, as if he'd done this in his sleep 100 times before. Catherine's pulse slowed. The irritation she'd felt melted into something unfamiliar. Warmth, yes, but laced with a hint of vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself in years. For a moment, she wasn't the billionaire CEO returning from a business trip. She was just a mother, standing in the quiet, watching her children sleep safe in the care of a man she barely knew. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back. She ignored it. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, studying the lines of Mason's face, the rough stubble on his jaw, the way his presence seemed to steady the entire room. And she wondered, not for the first time that night, what kind of man sleeps on a cold floor just to keep two children from waking alone? That question, she knew, was going to stay with her. The morning light in the Westwood estate was soft but cold, spilling across the polished floors in thin ribbons. Catherine stood at the head of the breakfast table, her coffee cooling in her hand. She had been up since dawn, replaying the image of Mason sleeping on the floor with her twins. At first, she'd told herself it was a one-time lapse in judgment, but as the hours passed, that explanation felt too neat, too easy. When Mason appeared in the doorway, his uniform jacket buttoned to the collar, hair damp from an early shower, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'd like to know," she began, her voice low but firm, "why you were in my children's room last night." He didn't flinch. He just stepped inside, standing with his weight balanced like someone used to being evaluated. "They couldn't sleep," he said simply. "I stayed until they did." "That doesn't answer my question," Catherine pressed. "Why were you in there at all? That's not your job." Mason's gaze shifted, not evasively, but as if choosing his words with care. "The nanny had an emergency. She left early. The twins were awake. I stayed." There was more to it. She could feel it in the pause between his sentences, in the way his shoulders tightened slightly under the crisp fabric of his jacket. But he didn't offer anything else, and Catherine found herself uncomfortably aware of how steady his voice was. "You should have called me," she said, more out of reflex than conviction. "Maybe," Mason replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly. But they needed someone right then, not a phone call. For a moment, Catherine had no answer. She told herself it was because of his tone, calm, measured, without the slightest trace of apology. But the truth was, she'd heard something in those words she didn't want to admit. A quiet certainty, the kind that comes from living through nights far more urgent than this one. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of his forearm where the sleeve had ridden up slightly. A thick, jagged scar curved from his wrist halfway to his elbow, pale against his skin. It wasn't the kind of mark you got from an accident at home. She recognized the shape of it, the kind that came from shrapnel or worse. For reasons she couldn't explain, the sight shifted something in her. Suspicion gave way to a flicker of curiosity. Later that morning, she called her head of security. "Tell me about Mason Hall," she said. The answer came without hesitation. Marine Corps, 2 tours overseas, came back with an honorable discharge. No criminal record. Lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago, raising a 10-year-old son on his own. Lives in the Riverstone apartment complex over on the east side. The details landed harder than she expected. She pictured the man she'd seen last night on the floor with her children, steady and quiet, and tried to reconcile him with the image of a soldier returning from war, carrying scars both seen and unseen. By mid-morning, the calm in the house had fractured. It started in the service hallway near the laundry room, where the housekeeper, Mrs. Prescott, cornered Catherine with a look of moral outrage. "I have to speak plainly, Ms. Westwood," the older woman said. "That man overstepped, sleeping in the children's room. That's not proper." Catherine held her expression neutral. The circumstances were unusual. The nanny left unexpectedly. Mrs. Prescott's lips pressed into a thin line. "All the more reason to follow protocol. He's the security guard, not family. It's not his place to put himself in that position." The words, "not his place," hung in the air like smoke. Catherine had heard that tone before. In boardrooms, in fundraisers, in quiet country clubs where rules were unspoken but ironclad. The implication was clear. Lines had been crossed. By noon, the murmurs had spread. A pair of junior staff were whispering near the pantry. A driver lingered by the kitchen door, glancing away when she passed. The estate, usually a well-oiled machine, had developed a subtle but unmistakable tension. Catherine found Mason in the security office reviewing footage from the previous night. "I'm hearing complaints," she said, stepping inside. He didn't look up from the screen. "I figured you would. You're being accused of overstepping." Now he looked at her, eyes level. "If keeping two scared kids company counts as overstepping, then yes, I did." It was blunt, and it carried a weight that silenced her for a moment. "People are concerned about boundaries," she said finally. "Boundaries," Mason repeated, as if tasting the word. "I've seen what happens when they're used to keep people from doing what's right." There was no malice in his voice, just a quiet conviction that made it harder to dismiss him outright. Catherine realized with a small jolt that this man wasn't going to explain himself in the way she was used to. He would not beg for approval or craft a story to smooth over her discomfort. As she left the room, the low murmur of the rain from the night before still seemed to echo in her mind. She didn't yet know if she trusted him, but she knew one thing with certainty. This was not the last time Mason Hall would unsettle her carefully ordered world. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the Westwood estate bathed in a pale winter light. Catherine stood at the edge of the nursery, her arms folded loosely across her chest. The room was quiet, too quiet for children their age. The silence wasn't new. It was a constant hum in the background of her life, but it still pressed against her like a weight she couldn't lift. She had learned to stop expecting chatter, laughter, or the spontaneous squeals that once filled these walls. Ever since her husband's death 2 years ago, Anna and Lily had retreated into a world of their own, speaking in brief whispers to each other and almost never to anyone else. The string of nannies she'd hired, some with glowing references, others with degrees in child psychology, had all left within a few months, worn down not by tantrums or misbehavior, but by the unyielding quiet. When Catherine mentioned it to Mason that morning, she expected a flicker of surprise, maybe pity. Instead, he simply nodded as if the information settled into a place he already understood. "They don't need questions right now," he said, "or pressure. They need space to decide for themselves when to let someone in." She almost laughed, not mockingly. "And you think you can get through to them by giving them space?" "I don't think," he replied with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know." By afternoon, Catherine found him in the playroom, not standing guard by the door like security staff usually did, but sitting cross-legged on the carpet. A blanket was spread beside him. On it, small wooden blocks were stacked in uneven towers, some leaning precariously, others toppled into colorful piles. Anna sat opposite him, her blonde hair falling in loose strands around her face, clutching a red block. Lily was closer to the wall, knees tucked under her dress, watching but not moving. Mason didn't speak. He didn't gesture for them to come closer or tell them what to do. He simply picked up 2 blocks and began stacking, slow and deliberate, as if he had nowhere else in the world to be. Minutes passed. The quiet in the room shifted, less like a barrier, more like a waiting space. Anna edged forward first, her small hands setting a block on top of his stack. Mason didn't comment, just moved a different block closer to her. The simple, unspoken exchange repeated until Anna was kneeling on the blanket beside him. Then, unexpectedly, she tugged at his sleeve. Mason glanced down. She pointed toward a mismatched pile of blocks and then to an empty corner of the blanket. He understood immediately. She wanted to start a new tower. Across the room, Lily's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't much, but for Catherine, watching unseen from the doorway, it was more progress than any nanny had made in months. After nearly half an hour, Mason reached for the folded napkins sitting on the low table. "Want to see something?" he asked. Not to both, not loudly but gently, his eyes flicking from Anna to Lily. He flattened the napkin on the blanket, smoothing its edges. Then, with precise, deliberate folds, he shaped it into a sharp triangular pennant. "This," he said quietly, "is a battle flag. You carry it when you have to move forward, no matter how scared you are." Anna tilted her head, watching intently. Lily, for the first time, slid a little closer. Mason handed the flag to Anna, then took another napkin and began folding again, slower this time. letting the girls see each step. The corners tucked in just so, the center crease pressed firm, the triangle forming like a secret revealed. When he finished, he placed it in front of Lily. She didn't touch it right away, but her gaze stayed fixed on the small white flag. "You keep it," Mason said softly. "Both of you, it's a reminder. Every time you feel like hiding, you remember you've still got it in you to stand." Catherine felt a strange pull in her chest. There was no grand speech, no coaxing, just a simple ritual done with the kind of care that made even a folded napkin feel like something sacred. And yet there was something in his tone, a gravity that hinted at a past most people couldn't imagine. Later, as the girls drifted back to their corner with the flags in hand, Mason stayed seated on the floor, stacking the last of the blocks alone. He didn't look toward the doorway, but Catherine had the odd sense he knew she was there. When she turned to leave, she caught herself glancing at the napkins again. She didn't know what battles this man had fought, or why he carried them quietly in his shoulders and in his hands. But she knew one thing: he was changing the air in her house, and not by force. It was something far rarer. The sky had been gray all afternoon, but by 3 o'clock, the rain came in hard, pounding the estate's glass windows like fists. Catherine was upstairs in her study, a dozen faces staring at her from the conference screen. The quarterly meeting had already run long. She barely noticed the shift in the rhythm of the storm outside. Downstairs, the house was oddly quiet. The temporary nanny hired just 2 days earlier had vanished somewhere between the kitchen and the staff lounge, muttering something about needing to make a phone call. Mason, making his usual rounds, paused at the end of the hallway that overlooked the back garden. Through the rain-streaked glass, a flash of movement caught his eye, a small figure darting across the lawn, dress plastered to her legs by the downpour. Anna. He didn't think. He just moved. Boots splashed through the tiled entry as he shoved open the rear door. The cold hit him first, then the sound, the unrelenting hammer of rain, the wind twisting his shirt against his back. Anna was halfway across the yard, her blonde hair a wet halo. She was calling out for something, though her voice was swallowed by the storm. Then he saw it. A small tabby cat perched precariously on the stone edge of the ornamental pond. The water below churned from the force of the rain, the slick stones glistening like glass. "Anna!" Mason's voice cut through the weather, firm but not loud enough to frighten her. She didn't look back. One tiny foot slid on the soaked grass, her arms flailing for balance. He was already running. The ground under him was mud and hidden roots. His boots skidded more than once. He closed the gap just as she stepped onto the first stone of the pond's border. A single terrible second, her foot slipped sideways, her center of gravity tipping toward the dark water. Mason lunged, his arm hooking around her small frame. He twisted as they fell, his back taking the brunt as they hit the wet ground. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. A sharp sting flared along his forearm where it had scraped a jagged rock. Anna clung to him, eyes wide, her chest heaving. The cat bolted to safety on its own, tail high as if nothing had happened. Above them, from the second-floor balcony, Catherine had come to investigate the commotion. She stood frozen, hands gripping the railing, watching the man who only days ago had been a name on a staff roster. The rain blurred everything, softened the edges, but she could see the instinct in his movements, the way he had shielded her child without a second's hesitation. Mason shifted to his knees, one arm still steady around Anna. "You okay?" he asked, searching her face. She gave a small nod, then buried her head against his chest. By the time they reached the covered patio, Catherine was already there, umbrella forgotten on the chair behind her. She knelt beside Anna, brushing wet hair from her daughter's face. "Go inside, sweetheart. Get dry clothes." Anna hesitated, then slipped away toward the house. Catherine's gaze moved to Mason. His shirt clung to him, the fabric torn at the sleeve where blood mixed with rainwater. "You're hurt," she said. "Oh, it's nothing." He glanced at the scrape, flexed his fingers. "Better me than her." It should have been simple gratitude, perhaps even a thank you, but the moment fractured almost immediately. From the far end of the patio, Richard Kendall, the estate's head of security, stepped forward. His voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the rain. "You had no authorization to leave your post," Richard said. "You're here to handle security, not chase cats and play hero. That's for the domestic staff." Mason's jaw tightened. She was about to fall in. You still broke protocol. Richard's eyes flicked toward Catherine. For the safety of the household, I recommend he be reassigned off-site immediately. The words hung in the damp air. Catherine's instinct was to argue, but part of her knew Richard wasn't wrong about the rules. The staff was meant to stay in their lanes. Boundaries existed for a reason. And yet she could still see Mason in the rain, his body twisting mid-fall so Anna wouldn't hit the ground, the protective way his arms had wrapped around her. Let me think on it, she said finally. Richard gave a curt nod and stepped back, but Mason's eyes stayed steady on hers. There was no plea there, no defensiveness, just a quiet certainty that he'd do it all again if it meant keeping the child safe. When Catherine returned to her meeting, the voices of her colleagues blurred into background noise. All she could see was the image from the balcony, framed in the storm, a man who claimed no authority, no special role, and yet had acted as if it was the only role that mattered. She wasn't sure what troubled her more, the break in protocol or the fact that for the first time in years she'd felt something she couldn't quite name. The rain had stopped by the time Mason's shift ended, leaving the street slick and reflecting the jaundiced glow of street lamps. He took the bus to the edge of town, the ride long enough for the adrenaline of the afternoon to fade into a dull ache in his arm and a sharper one in his chest. His building was the kind of place no one photographed for rental listings, paint curling away from the bricks, mailboxes dented and rust-stained. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the second floor, key ready in hand. When the door opened, the smell of something warm and faintly sweet greeted him. Noah was sitting cross-legged on the worn couch, a school workbook open on his lap. The boy looked up, his grin immediate. "Dad, you're home." Mason's shoulders eased. He closed the door behind him, setting his bag down in the corner. The apartment was small, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with a door that didn't quite shut all the way. The wallpaper had peeled in long strips near the window, and the refrigerator hummed like it was straining to breathe. Inside, it held only a carton of milk, half a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. Yet somehow it felt full because of the boy. Noah hopped off the couch and crossed the room in a few steps. "You're soaked," he said, touching his father's damp sleeve. "Caught in the rain," Mason replied with a faint smile. He tousled Noah's hair, then lowered himself onto the couch. "How was school?" The boy shrugged. "Math test tomorrow. I think I got it." His eyes searched Mason's face as if measuring how much he could ask. "Everything okay at work?" "Fine." The answer was automatic, but Noah seemed satisfied enough. They shared a quiet moment, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing below. Later, when Noah had gone to bed, Mason sat in the dim kitchen, his forearms resting on the table. The scrape on his arm stung faintly. But that wasn't what kept him awake. The flashback came without warning, sharp, intrusive. He was back in the desert, the sun a white fire overhead. His unit had been ordered to hold position until evac, but a call came through. 2 children spotted in the open, too close to an active field. Mason had made the choice to go after them. His sergeant had shouted the order to stand down, but Mason had already moved. By the time he reached the children, gunfire had erupted. The evac came late. In the chaos, one of his closest friends, Staff Sergeant Jake Turner, was hit. Mason had carried him half a mile before realizing the truth. Jake was gone. That decision had cost him more than a commendation. It had planted a weight inside his chest that never left. Even after discharge, the nightmares, the what-ifs, the endless second-guessing, it was all there, stitched into the fabric of his days. And maybe that was why, when he saw a child in danger, any child, he couldn't just stand still. Across town, Catherine sat in her own kitchen, far removed from the crumbling paint and the hum of a tired refrigerator. The estate was silent except for the low murmur of the dishwasher. Her mind kept circling back to the image of Mason in the rain, the way Anna had clung to him, the blood on his sleeve. She had questions, too many for a simple employee file to answer, and Catherine Westwood was not a woman who let questions go unanswered. That was how she found herself in the maintenance wing the next morning, seeking out a man named Daniel Cooper. His name had been on a roster she'd skimmed once. Ex-military, honorable discharge, now working as part of the estate's facilities team. Daniel was in the workshop, oil-stained hands deep in the guts of a generator. He straightened when he saw her, wiping his palms on a rag. Bye, ma'am. Daniel, she said, keeping her voice even. You served with Mason Hall, didn't you? His brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. Yeah, back in '09. Why? I want to know more about him. The man, not the employee. Daniel hesitated. That's not a simple story. I have time. Daniel set the rag down, leaning against the workbench. He was one of the best soldiers I ever knew. Smart, steady under fire, but he exhaled slowly. He blames himself for something that wasn't his fault. We were in Helmand. There was a situation. 2 kids in danger. Mason went after them. We got them out, but we lost Turner that day. Mason never forgave himself. Came back stateside and never quite put the uniform down, if you know what I mean. Always watching, always ready to step in. Catherine absorbed the words, the pieces of a puzzle starting to align. The way Mason hovered near the twins without smothering them, the instinct in his movements, the quiet weight in his eyes. Daniel continued, he's not the kind of man who'll tell you this himself, doesn't want pity. He just carries it. And maybe that's why he can't walk away when someone's at risk, especially kids. When Catherine left the workshop, she felt the shift. Her suspicion hadn't evaporated. Years of guardedness didn't vanish in an afternoon, but something else had taken root alongside it. Understanding, maybe, or something uncomfortably close to respect. Back in his apartment, Mason sat on the floor beside Noah's bed, watching his son sleep. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent. But here in this small, imperfect space, there was warmth enough to keep the dark at bay. For now. The call came just after sunrise when the pale light was still spilling cautiously into Mason's kitchen. He had been pouring coffee into a chipped mug, the kind that had survived moves and deployments, when his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made him freeze. Catherine Westwood. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Then Noah's sleepy voice floated from the doorway. Aren't you going to answer, Dad? Mason thumbed the green icon. Hello? Catherine's voice was cool but not cold. Mr. Hall, I'd like to speak with you in person today. 2 hours later, Mason stood once again in the marble foyer of the Westwood estate, feeling like he'd stepped into another world. Catherine was waiting in the sunroom, dressed in a tailored cream blouse, her hair pulled back into a sleek knot. Sunlight caught in the rim of her coffee cup, but her eyes stayed on him. I've reconsidered, she began. What happened with Anna? It showed me something I can't ignore. You have instincts I value, but if you come back, it will be under clear terms. No overnight stays unless explicitly approved. No unsupervised outings without my consent. Everything documented. Mason stood there, hands loosely at his sides, absorbing the words. The offer was a lifeline, but it came with barbed edges. Why me? He asked quietly. Because the twins respond to you, she said simply. And because I think you might be the kind of man who can help them find their way back to the world. He didn't answer right away. The memory of his last assignment here, ending in rain, blood, and a security reprimand, still stung. He had failed before. He could fail again. And this time the cost might not just be his job, but the trust of 2 little girls who'd already lost too much. Catherine's voice softened. If you'd rather decline, I'll understand. That night, Mason sat at the small kitchen table, the Westwood contract lying between him and Noah. His son was working through a bowl of cereal, spoons scraping faintly against ceramic. You don't want to go back? Noah asked, glancing up. Mason exhaled slowly. It's not that simple. What if I mess it up again? What if Noah interrupted, his voice clear and steady. If someone believes you can do something good, you don't walk away just because you're scared. You told me once, courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing it anyway. The boy's gaze held his. Mason felt something tighten in his chest, then loosen. The next morning, he returned to the estate. The security gate opened without hesitation this time, but he could feel the eyes of the guards tracking him. Inside, the atmosphere was polite but brittle. A few staff members exchanged stiff nods. Others didn't bother hiding their disapproval. The head housekeeper whispered something to a maid as he passed, her expression pinched. In the playroom, the twins sat on the floor, a half-built train set sprawling across the rug. Anna's hair had come loose from its braid, and Lily was absently twirling a wooden caboose in her hands. When they saw him, Lily's mouth twitched into a shy smile. But Anna stood, clutching a small stuffed fox. She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the carpet. Mason crouched to meet her gaze. "Hey, kiddo." She hesitated, eyes darting between his face and the toy in her hands. Then, in a voice so soft he almost thought he'd imagined it, she whispered, "Uncle M." It was the first sound she had made to anyone outside her sister in months. For a beat, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Even Catherine, who had stepped quietly into the doorway, froze where she stood. Mason felt a rush of heat behind his eyes. He swallowed, managing a small smile. "That's me," he said gently. Anna's fingers tightened around the fox before she handed it to him, as if entrusting him with something precious. Catherine didn't speak until later, when they crossed paths in the hall. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you made the right choice." So did he, sire. The late afternoon light slanted through the Westwood Estates library windows, painting the floor in amber stripes. The twins were in the next room, absorbed in a puzzle, their soft murmurs drifting like the sound of distant waves. Mason sat in one of the deep leather chairs across from Catherine, a porcelain teacup cradled in her hands. They had started meeting here after the girls' lessons. Small, unplanned conversations that grew longer each day. Today, Catherine broke the silence first. "I used to hate this time of day," she said, eyes fixed on the shifting light. "Twilight. My father always left around now when I was little. Said he had business. Sometimes he didn't come back for weeks." Mason looked at her, sensing the tension beneath her polished exterior. "You were close to him?" Her lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. "I was close to the idea of him, but every time I thought he'd stay, he didn't. My mother tried, but she was tired. I learned early not to rely too much on anyone. People leave." The last words hung between them like dust in the light. Mason understood that kind of wound, the kind that didn't bleed but never healed clean. He shifted in his chair. "When I was overseas," he began slowly, "we had a saying, 'It's not the bullet that kills you, it's the silence afterward.' I lost a man once, a friend, wrong call. I told myself for months that I could have done something different." Catherine's gaze softened. "What did you do?" "What any coward does," he said, his voice low. "I drank every night. I told myself it was to sleep, but really it was to stop thinking. And it worked until the day I saw my boy looking at me like I was a stranger. That was the day I stopped." There was no pity in her eyes, only a stillness that felt like respect. "You pulled yourself back." "No," Mason said. "Noah pulled me back. I just followed his voice." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt different, less like employer and employee, more like two people recognizing the fractures in each other's armor. But in another corner of the house, not all ears were friendly. From the shadows near the library door, a slender figure lingered. Phone angled subtly. Victor Lawrence, one of the senior estate staff, had never trusted Mason. He had his reasons, some personal, some born of simple resentment. The red recording dot blinked quietly as Mason's voice carried. "My call. Wrong call. I told myself for months." The next morning, the estate hummed with a different kind of energy. Mason felt it as soon as he stepped inside. Conversations cut short when he passed. Glances exchanged over coffee trays. Even the guards at the gate were unusually terse. By noon, he knew why. In the maintenance hallway, Daniel, his old comrade turned building engineer, pulled him aside. "You should know," Daniel said in a low voice. "Someone's been running their mouth. Says you caused a man's death in the field, and they've got an audio clip." Mason's stomach tightened. "They don't know the whole story." "They don't want the whole story," Daniel replied grimly. "They want you gone." It was a familiar kind of battlefield, this time without iron or rifles, whispers instead of gunfire, but the same sense of crosshairs on his back. That evening, Catherine found him in the playroom, watching the twins build a cardboard fort. "Something's going on," she said, eyes searching his face. "Half the staff has come to me with concerns. I need to know. Did you say what they claim you said?" "Yes," Mason answered without hesitation. but not the way they're telling it. I lost someone under my command. I've carried that weight every day since. If that makes me unfit to be around your kids, tell me now. Catherine studied him for a long moment, the quiet crackling between them like static before a storm. I'll decide that for myself, she said at last. But Mason could see it, the question in her eyes, not disbelief, not yet. Trust, something in between. The rain started as a whisper against the tall windows of the Westwood estate, growing into a steady percussion that blurred the city lights beyond the glass. Inside, the house was unusually quiet. Catherine had been called to an emergency board meeting downtown, urgent enough that her driver barely waited for the front gates to close before pulling away. Mason had just finished reading to the twins in their upstairs playroom. Anna was curled under a blanket, fighting sleep, while Lily had fallen asleep mid-doodle, crayon still in hand. The warm hum of the night routine was a sharp contrast to what was brewing miles away in the heart of Catherine's company. Across town in a steel and glass conference room, voices clashed over a projected spreadsheet. Catherine stood at the head of the table, her jaw set. If we can't lock down that server breach before the contract review tomorrow, Harrington Holdings walks. That's $80 million in future revenue gone. Her head of ET shook his head grimly. The intrusion point traces back to a ping inside the home network. It's possible, he hesitated. Possible someone had physical access. Catherine felt the chill in those words. The estate, the place she had considered the safest point in her orbit. Back at the mansion, the first sign of trouble came not as sound, but absence. Mason noticed it the way soldiers notice when the wind changes. Too quiet downstairs. Then faint, the muted click of a latch. He moved silently to the hallway, the rhythm of combat training surfacing like an old reflex. From the staircase landing, he caught a shadow sliding along the wall near the ground floor study. And then the sound that froze him, Anna's muffled whimper from the bedroom behind him. Two paths opened in his mind. One led down the stairs toward the study, the server hub, the source of the breach. The other led back to the girls. In war, you calculate the objective. Tonight, the objective was clear. Protect the living. Mason shut the playroom door softly and moved quickly inside, crouching before the twins. We're going to play a game, he whispered. Stay under the desk. No sound, no matter what you hear. Anna's wide eyes searched his, and for the first time, Mason saw something beyond fear. Trust. The intruder's footsteps were heavier now, moving toward the hall. Mason slipped out, closing the door without a sound, and positioned himself in the narrow corridor outside the girls' room. The house security alarms, silent for now, hadn't tripped, meaning whoever was here knew the system. A figure emerged from the dim hall, hood pulled low, a black satchel slung across one shoulder. The man's gaze flicked up in surprise at the sight of Mason. That half-second hesitation was all Mason needed. He moved forward in a controlled burst, catching the man's wrist before it could reach inside his jacket. They hit the wall with a muffled thud. The intruder twisted, striking at Mason's ribs, but Mason pivoted, absorbing the blow and driving the man toward the staircase. The fight was quick, dirty, and without flourish. Both men breathing hard, trading grips and shoves until Mason managed to wrench the satchel free. The intruder bolted down the stairs and into the rain-slicked night, vanishing before Mason could give chase. By the time estate security arrived, delayed by the storm and a suspiciously cut comm line, Mason was standing in the foyer, shirt torn, the satchel at his feet. Inside, a portable drive, still warm from the server connection, and beside it, a smashed handheld device that had been halfway through siphoning files when Mason had stepped in. When Catherine returned an hour later, her hair damp from the storm and her voice edged with exhaustion, the head of security laid out the facts. The breach had deepened while she was gone. The portable drive Mason recovered contained fragments of sensitive data, but not all. The rest was gone. He stayed upstairs, one guard noted. Didn't try to secure the server room. Catherine's gaze cut to Mason. Is that true? Mason's answer was steady. Yes, I heard them upstairs first. I wasn't going to leave the girls. Her expression was unreadable, caught between gratitude and frustration. That decision cost us critical data, Mason. The kind we can't get back. They're just files, he said quietly. They're not your daughters. The words hung in the room, heavy and divisive. By morning, the story had already fractured the household. Some staff whispered that Mason was a hero who'd put the girls above everything. Others muttered that he was reckless, that the company's future, and by extension, the twins' security, was tied to that data. And in the middle of it all, Catherine stood at the threshold of two truths, neither of them easy to hold. The storm had passed, but the air in the Westwood estate was no less heavy. Overnight, headlines had started to leak. Security breach at Westwood Global, 80 million contract at risk. Catherine had spent the morning moving between damage control calls and curt responses to board members demanding answers. Through it all, Mason's name kept surfacing, not in the press, but in whispered conversations behind closed doors. By noon, Daniel, one of the maintenance leads and the only person in the house who treated Mason like an equal, asked Catherine for a private word. They met in the side garden, where the wet stones still glistened from last night's rain. Daniel didn't waste time. "You think Mason screwed up last night?" he said, his voice low. "But you don't have the whole picture." Catherine crossed her arms, impatient. "I have the picture that matters. We lost critical data because he didn't follow protocol." Daniel shook his head. "That critical data you're so worried about? Half of it was a ghost file." "Allure?" She blinked. "Allure?" "Yeah, Mason planted it weeks ago. It's rigged with a tracker. Low grade, buried deep, so subtle your IT guys wouldn't even notice unless they were looking for it. And judging from their reaction last night, they weren't." Catherine frowned. "Why would he even—" "Because," Daniel interrupted, "the man who broke into your server room isn't just some corporate thief. He's tied to a case Mason's been chasing for years. A little girl went missing, daughter of a guy Mason served with in Helmand. They never found her until a few months back when a lead pointed straight to a tech broker who sells both stolen data and—" He hesitated. "And kids?" The words hit like cold steel. Catherine's throat tightened. "And you're saying the man in my house fits the profile?" "Mason's been in touch with a detective in missing persons. He offered himself as bait, knowing the guy might try to breach a high-value target. The files he let go? They're tagged. As we speak, that detective is following a breadcrumb trail Mason set." Catherine took a slow breath, the weight of the revelation pressing down. Images from last night replayed in her mind. Mason's steady gaze when she'd accused him, the way he'd said, "They're not your daughters." "And if he'd gone to the server room instead of the girls," she asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "That man could have grabbed Anna or Lily, and if he got past the gates with one of them—" He let the thought hang, unfinished but suffocating. For the first time since the breach, Catherine felt the tight knot in her chest shift, not loosening, but changing shape. The outrage she'd been nursing turned into something harder to name. A mix of guilt, gratitude, and the uneasy awareness that she might have misjudged the one man in her home who wasn't afraid to stand up to her. "You should also know," Daniel added, "Mason didn't tell you any of this because the op's still alive. The less you knew, the cleaner the chain of custody for whatever the cops catch." Catherine turned toward the main house, her heels crunching on the wet gravel. The sky was clearing now, patches of pale blue breaking through the gray, but her mind was still a storm. Mason had risked his reputation, his job, maybe even his freedom, and he'd done it quietly, without asking for trust first. She found herself wondering if that was bravery or a man so used to carrying the weight alone that he didn't know how to set it down. In the days that followed, the estate settled into an uneasy routine. Catherine's damage control had been swift and effective, a strategic leak about a security test that had identified vulnerabilities, a reassurance to investors that resulted in only a minor dip in stock prices. But beneath the surface, currents were shifting. The twins began to emerge from their shell. It started small, Anna asking for Mason when he wasn't in the room, Lily bringing him drawings with colors that hadn't appeared in her work for months. And Mason, steady as always, became a fixed point in their orbits. Never pushing, never demanding, just present. Catherine watched this transformation with a mix of wonder and unease. She found reasons to be in the room when Mason spent time with the girls, reviewing paperwork at the nursery desk, taking calls in the corner of the playroom. She told herself it was caution, but deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. She was beginning to see what Daniel had seen, not just the soldier or the security guard, but the whole of the man. On a crisp morning when the November air carried the first hint of frost, Victor Lawrence appeared in her office doorway. Victor had been her head of digital operations for nearly 5 years, his expertise undeniable, even if his demeanor left something to be desired. He was trim, impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "We need to talk about the new security measures," he said, sliding a tablet across her desk. "After the breach, I've taken the liberty of upgrading the entire system." Catherine scanned the proposal. "This is comprehensive." "It has to be." Victor's voice carried a hint of superiority. "We can't afford another incident. I've included surveillance upgrades for the entire property, inside and out." She paused at that. Inside. For the children's safety, of course. Catherine looked up, studying him. She'd known Victor since college. They'd dated briefly before her marriage. Remained colleagues after, but something in his tone struck a discordant note. "I'll review it," she said, setting the tablet aside. Victor lingered. "There's something else. Your new guard, Hall, his background check was incomplete." "What do you mean?" "I've done some digging. Did you know he was questioned in connection with a case involving classified documents? Nothing came of it. But still, a man with access to your home, your children." The implication hung in the air. Catherine felt a strange defensiveness rise in her chest. "Thank you for your concern, Victor. I'll look into it." After he left, she sat motionless, staring at the closed door. The seeds of doubt had been carefully planted. She told herself they wouldn't take root. But as the day wore on, the questions multiplied. That evening, she found Mason in the kitchen making hot chocolate with the twins. Anna was standing on a stool, carefully stirring a pot while Mason held it steady. Lily was arranging marshmallows on a plate, sorting them by size with methodical precision. It was such a normal scene, so achingly domestic, that Catherine almost turned away. But Anna spotted her. "Mommy?" The word still felt new, a gift recently unwrapped. "We're making hot chocolate. Uncle M showed us the secret recipe." Mason glanced up, his expression carefully neutral. "Hope that's okay." "It's fine," Catherine said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Room for one more?" Something flickered across Mason's face. Surprise. Perhaps pleasure. "Always." Later, after the girls had been tucked in, Catherine found herself alone with Mason in the kitchen. The remains of their impromptu dessert were scattered across the counter, empty mugs, a dusting of cocoa powder, a few forgotten marshmallows. "That was your mother's recipe," she said. It wasn't a question. Mason looked up from where he was wiping down the counter. "How'd you know?" "The way you showed them, like you were passing down something precious." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "She made it every Sunday, no matter how tight money was that week. Said some traditions matter more than practicality." Catherine leaned against the doorframe. "Victor Lawrence came to see me today. He had concerns about your background." The shift was immediate, Mason's shoulders tensing, his movements becoming more deliberate. "I see. Were you investigated for mishandling classified documents?" He set the cloth down, turning to face her fully. "Yes, after my discharge. Someone needed a scapegoat for a mission gone wrong. The investigation found nothing because there was nothing to find." "Why didn't you tell me?" "It's not something I advertise. Would you have hired me if I had?" The honesty of the question caught her off guard. "Probably not." "There's your answer." She studied him in the soft kitchen light, the way his guard was now firmly in place. The man who had made hot chocolate with her daughters had retreated, replaced by the soldier who assessed threats in calculated responses. "Victor wants to install additional surveillance throughout the house." Mason's jaw tightened. "And you're considering it?" "Shouldn't I be, after what happened?" "Your house, your call." His voice was even, but something in his eyes had closed off. "But ask yourself this. Who benefits most from having eyes everywhere? The twins, who are just starting to feel safe? Or someone with access to the feeds?" Before she could answer, he gathered the last of the dishes and placed them in the sink. "I should check the perimeter before I clock out." As he left, Catherine felt the distance between them widen again. It was a familiar feeling, this deliberate separation. She had built her life around such boundaries, clear lines between personal and professional, parent and CEO, past and present. But watching Mason walk away, she wondered if some boundaries were less like protection and more like prison walls. The next Saturday dawned clear and cold. Catherine had cleared her schedule, a rarity that the twins met with cautious excitement. They were eating breakfast when Mason arrived, earlier than his usual shift. Noah was with him, a slender boy with his father's watchful eyes and a smile that came more easily. He stood slightly behind Mason, taking in the grand dining room with undisguised curiosity. "Ms. Westwood," Mason began, "I hope it's not an imposition. The babysitter canceled last minute and—" "It's not a problem," Catherine said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "Join us." Noah needed no further invitation. He slid into the seat beside Lily, who regarded him with solemn interest. "I'm Noah," he said, offering his hand with a formality that spoke of careful coaching. Lily looked at the outstretched hand, then at Mason, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Slowly, she placed her small palm against Noah's. "Lily," she whispered. Anna, not to be outdone, leaned across the table. "I'm Anna. We're twins, but I'm 7 minutes older." Noah's face lit up. "That's cool. I always wanted a brother or a sister, someone to play with." "We have lots of toys," Anna said, warming to the conversation. "Do you like trains?" As the children's conversation gained momentum, Catherine found herself watching Mason. He had taken the seat across from her, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. This was a different man from the one who had left her kitchen the night before. Here, with his son nearby, the walls he maintained seemed thinner, more permeable. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For this." Catherine nodded, surprised by the simple gratitude. "He seems like a good kid." "The best part of me." There was no pretense in the words, just a father's unvarnished truth. After breakfast, the children migrated to the playroom. Catherine and Mason followed, settling into the window seat that overlooked the sprawling back garden. The November sun cast long shadows across the lawn, turning the ornamental pond into a mirror of burnished gold. For a while, they simply watched the children. Noah had integrated himself seamlessly into the twins' world, showing them how to build a more stable block tower, listening seriously to Anna's elaborate backstory for her stuffed fox. "He's good with them," Catherine observed. "He's had practice. The building super has 3 kids. Noah watches them sometimes when Mrs. Diaz needs to run errands." "At his age?" Mason's smile held a hint of pride. "He's always been older than his years." "Like his father?" The comment earned her a sideways glance. "Maybe, though I'd hope he carries less baggage." Catherine turned to face him fully. "About yesterday, Victor's proposal. I haven't made a decision yet." Mason nodded, his attention still on the children. "It's not my place to question your security choices, but you have concerns." He was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. "Surveillance changes how people behave. Not just the bad actors, but everyone. Knowing you're being watched, it creates a different kind of prison." The insight struck her more deeply than she expected. Catherine had built her career in rooms where every word was recorded, every gesture analyzed. She'd learned to perform accordingly, to present a version of herself polished for consumption. The idea of bringing that same scrutiny into her home, into her children's sanctuary, suddenly felt intrusive. "I'll take that under advisement," she said more formally than she intended. Before Mason could respond, a crash from the playroom pulled their attention back to the children. Noah was on his feet, apologizing profusely. A vase lay in pieces on the floor, water and flowers scattered across the expensive carpet. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." His face had gone pale. Mason was already moving, but Catherine reached the scene first. She knelt beside the broken glass, careful of the shards. "Are you hurt?" she asked, checking Noah's hands and feet. He shook his head, eyes wide with apprehension. "I can pay for it. I have money saved." The earnestness of the offer, from a child who clearly had little to spare, caught at Catherine's heart. "It's just a vase," she said gently. "Things break. That's what things do." Relief washed over Noah's face, followed immediately by confusion, as if he'd been bracing for a reaction that hadn't come. Mason appeared with a dustpan and towel, his movements efficient. As he helped clean up, Catherine caught the look that passed between father and son. Mason's reassurance, Noah's gradual relaxation. Later, when the mess had been cleared and the children had moved on to a new game, Mason found Catherine in the hallway. "Thank you," he said simply. "For how you handled that." She brushed it off. "It was nothing." Not to him it wasn't. Mason's voice had dropped lower. His mother, when she was sick, the medication made her unpredictable. Things breaking was a trigger. It took a long time for him to stop flinching at loud noises. The confession came without warning, a piece of his private history offered without expectation. Catherine felt the weight of it, the trust implicit in the sharing. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. Mason held her gaze. "Don't be. He's healing. We both are." The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then Noah's laugh echoed from the playroom, breaking the spell. "I should get back," Mason said, stepping away. Catherine watched him go, feeling as if something important had just happened, though she couldn't quite name what it was. The invitation arrived on Monday, the annual Westwood Global Charity Gala, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Catherine had attended every year since founding the company, a necessary ritual of corporate goodwill and strategic networking. This year, however, the thought of the event filled her with unusual dread. It would be her first major public appearance since Robert's death. The press would be watching, analyzing her every expression, looking for signs of either recovery or collapse. She was studying the invitation at her desk when her assistant, Claire, appeared with the day's schedule. "The event planners need final numbers for the gala," Claire said, tablet in hand, "and they wanted to confirm you'll be attending alone or with a guest." Catherine hesitated. "Alone, of course." Claire nodded, making a note. "And for the children, will Miss Prescott be staying overnight with them? Or would you prefer one of the newer nannies?" The thought of leaving the twins with either option sent an unexpected wave of anxiety through Catherine. Mrs. Prescott was competent but cold, and none of the rotating nannies had formed any real connection with the girls. "Actually," she heard herself say, "I was thinking of asking Mason to stay. The girls are comfortable with him." Claire's stylist paused mid-tap. "Mr. Hall, the security guard? Is there a problem?" "No, of course not." But Claire's expression said otherwise. "It's just unusual. People might talk." "People always talk," Catherine replied, a note of finality in her voice. "Make the arrangements." Later that day, she found Mason in the security office, reviewing camera footage from the previous night. He looked up as she entered, immediately alert. "Ms. Westwood." "Catherine," she corrected him, closing the door behind her. "I have a proposition for you." She explained about the gala, the overnight requirement, the twins' comfort with him. "I'd compensate you for the additional hours, of course." Mason considered her, head slightly tilted. "You're sure there must be more qualified options?" "If by qualified you mean someone with a degree in childhood education, then yes. But the girls trust you. That's the qualification that matters to me right now." He nodded slowly. "What about Noah?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't considered that the arrangement would require him to find overnight care for his own child. "Bring him," she said, the solution obvious once articulated. "The guest room adjoining the nursery has 2 beds. The children got along well on Saturday." Mason studied her face as if searching for some hidden agenda. "That's generous." "It's practical," she countered, though they both knew it was more than that. "So will you do it?" "Yes," he said simply. "We'll be there." As Catherine turned to leave, Mason called after her. "Catherine?" She paused at the door, struck by the sound of her name in his voice. "They'll be fine. I promise." The confidence in those words stayed with her throughout the day, a small comfort against the growing unease about the upcoming event. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of preparation. Catherine's dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance, midnight blue silk that caught the light as she moved, revealing subtle threads of silver. Her hair was swept up, diamond drops at her ears, her makeup flawless. She looked every inch the successful CEO, the grieving widow finding her strength, the woman in control of her destiny. It was a performance she had perfected over years of public scrutiny. In the nursery, a different scene was unfolding. Mason sat cross-legged on the floor, Noah beside him, while the twins showed them their bedtime routine with the enthusiasm of tour guides in a foreign land. And then we have to check for monsters, Anna explained, pulling open the closet door. Mommy says there aren't any, but we check anyway. Smart, Mason said seriously. Always verify your intel. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Will you read the story tonight? Mommy has to go to her party. Of course, he answered, glancing up as Catherine appeared in the doorway. The twins rushed to her, careful not to wrinkle her dress as they hugged her waist. You look like a princess, Anna declared. Thank you, sweetheart. Catherine knelt, bringing herself to their level, despite the expensive fabric. You'll be good for Mason and Noah? Both girls nodded solemnly. We'll take care of them, Lily said with unexpected gravity, earning a smile from Noah. I've left all the numbers on the kitchen counter, Catherine told Mason, straightening. My cell, the event coordinator, the pediatrician. We'll be fine, he assured her, echoing his earlier promise. Go. Charm the donors. Save the world. There was a lightness in his tone, a gentle teasing that felt new between them. Catherine found herself smiling in response. I'll try to be back by midnight. Don't worry about us, Cinderella. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than necessary. The castle will still be standing when you return. The exchange left Catherine feeling oddly buoyant as her driver guided the car through the city streets toward the museum. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with that kind of easy familiarity, without agenda or calculation. The gala itself was exactly as expected, a carefully choreographed dance of wealth and influence. Catherine moved through it with practiced grace, shaking the right hands, making the appropriate pledges, fielding questions about Westwood Global's latest innovations with confident poise. But beneath the polished surface, her mind kept drifting back to the estate, to the twins, to Noah's earnest face, to Mason sitting on the nursery floor promising to check for monsters. Catherine, you look stunning. The voice drew her back to the present. Victor stood before her, impeccable in his tuxedo, a champagne flute in one hand. She hadn't realized he would be attending. Victor, I didn't see your name on the guest list. Last-minute invitation from the Harriman Foundation. His smile was practiced. They're interested in our security protocols after that little test of ours made the industry rounds. She nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the unease that had settled in her stomach. How fortunate. Indeed, he gestured to the crowded room. First time back on the circuit since Robert, isn't it? You're handling it well. The mention of her late husband from Victor's lips felt intrusive, almost profane. Thank you for your concern. Always concerned about you, Catherine. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Speaking of which, I heard an interesting rumor today. Something about your new security arrangement at home? The chill that ran through her had nothing to do with the museum's air conditioning. Oh? Mason Hall, staying overnight, with your children. Victor's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held something else. Bold choice. The twins are comfortable with him. I'm sure they are. He has a way of making himself indispensable. Victor sipped his champagne. Just be careful. Men like that, with their backgrounds, their damage, they're not always what they seem. Before Catherine could respond, a board member approached, pulling her into a conversation about quarterly projections. Victor slipped away, but his words remained, a shadow at the edges of her thoughts. By 11, the weight of the evening, the constant performance, the subtle scrutiny, Victor's insinuations, had become exhausting. Catherine made her excuses and left early, the car cutting through the now quiet streets back toward home. When she arrived, the house was still, peaceful in a way that felt new. She slipped off her heels in the foyer, padding silently up the stairs toward the nursery. The door was ajar, a soft light spilling into the hallway. Catherine paused at the threshold, taking in the scene before her. The twins were asleep in their beds, faces relaxed in the kind of deep slumber that had eluded them for so long. Noah was curled on the guest bed, one arm flung out, fingers just touching the edge of a book that had fallen open beside him. And Mason was sitting in the rocking chair between the beds, head tilted back, eyes closed. Not fully asleep, but resting in that vigilant way she'd come to recognize. Even in repose, he was on guard. As if sensing her presence, his eyes opened, finding hers immediately in the dim light. He rose without a sound, moving to join her in the hallway. "How was it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that wouldn't disturb the children. "Predictable," she answered truthfully. "Exhausting." The kids were great. Noah showed them how to make shadow puppets on the wall. They wore themselves out around 9. Catherine leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Thank you for doing this." It was no hardship. His gaze traveled over her face, noting the fatigue she was trying to hide. "You should rest. You look terrible." She supplied with a small smile. "Beautiful," he corrected, the words simple and unadorned, but tired. The compliment, delivered without artifice, caught her off guard. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them charged with something unacknowledged. Then Mason stepped back slightly, breaking the spell. "I should check on Noah." "Of course." Catherine straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. "Good night, Mason." "Good night, Catherine." As she walked to her own room, she found herself wondering when the sound of her name and his voice had become something she noticed, something that resonated after he was gone. The morning brought a different kind of tension. Catherine woke to an urgent call from her CFO. Financial irregularities had been discovered in one of the company's subsidiary accounts, significant enough to warrant immediate attention, concerning enough to raise questions about internal controls. By the time she made it downstairs, the children were already in the kitchen with Mason, making pancakes with more enthusiasm than skill. Flour dusted the countertops, and the scent of butter and maple syrup filled the air. "Mommy," Anna called, waving a batter-covered spoon. "We're making breakfast." Catherine managed a smile despite the worry gnawing at her. "I see that. It looks delicious." Mason, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy, steered the children back to their task while creating space for her to speak privately. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Company issue. I need to go in." "On Sunday?" "It can't wait." She ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. "I hate to ask, but could you stay a bit longer until I can get someone else here?" "We'll be fine," he assured her, the same words as the night before, but weighted differently now. "Take whatever time you need." The relief she felt was immediate and profound. "Thank you." As she gathered her things, Catherine was struck by how easily she had come to rely on this man. It should have frightened her, this growing dependence. Instead, it felt like finding solid ground after months of shifting sand. The drive to the office was a blur of calls and emails, the situation unfolding with each passing minute. By the time she reached the Westwood Global Tower, the picture was becoming clearer, and all the more troubling. Someone inside the company had been systematically transferring small amounts from multiple accounts into an offshore holding company. The amounts were calculated to stay just below automatic reporting thresholds, but over time, they had accumulated into millions. Catherine spent hours in her office with the financial team, tracing patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. The breach was sophisticated, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of the company's financial systems. As the day wore on, a name began to emerge from the data, a common thread in the authorized access logs, a signature in the digital trail. Victor Lawrence. The revelation sent a cold wave through her. Victor, who had been with the company for years. Victor, who had access to nearly every system. Victor, who had been so concerned about Mason's presence in her home. By late afternoon, Catherine had enough evidence to justify a formal investigation. She placed a call to the company's outside counsel, initiating the process that would likely end in criminal charges. As she hung up, her phone buzzed with a text from Mason. "Everything okay? The girls are asking about dinner." The simple message, anchoring her back to the reality of home and family, steadied her. "On my way," she replied. "Tell them I'm bringing pizza." When she finally arrived home, the house was filled with the sound of children's laughter, a sound so rare in recent months that it stopped her in the foyer, a physical ache in her chest at the beauty of it. She followed the noise to the living room, where Mason, Noah, and the twins had constructed an elaborate fort from blankets, chairs, and what appeared to be every pillow in the house. Small flashlight beams danced inside the makeshift structure, accompanied by giggling and theatrical monster roars. For a moment, Catherine simply watched, pizza boxes cooling in her hands. The scene before her was so far removed from the corporate betrayal she'd spent the day unraveling that it felt like stepping into another world. Mason emerged from the fort first, spotting her immediately. "Reinforcements have arrived," he called into the fabric cave, prompting a chorus of excited squeals. The children tumbled out, faces flushed with excitement. The twins rushed to Catherine, wrapping their arms around her, while Noah hung back slightly, still shy in her presence. "Did you save the company?" Anna asked with the directness only a child could manage. Catherine blinked in surprise. "What makes you think the company needed saving?" "You had your serious face this morning," Lily explained as if it were obvious. "Uncle M said you were being a hero at work." Catherine glanced at Mason, who shrugged with a half-smile. Seemed like a reasonable explanation. "Well," she said, kneeling to the children's level, "I did what needed doing, and now I think we all need pizza." As they ate dinner, not at the formal dining table but picnic style on a blanket spread near the fort, Catherine found herself relaxing for the first time all day. The children's chatter washed over her, simple and uncomplicated, a counterpoint to the web of deceit she'd been untangling. Mason, sitting cross-legged beside her, seemed equally content, though she noticed how his gaze frequently swept up the room, checking exits, assessing potential risks, always on guard, even in moments of apparent ease. "You never really leave the battlefield, do you?" she asked quietly, when the children were distracted by a debate over the last slice. He looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Some habits are hard to break." "Is it exhausting? Always being vigilant?" Mason considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Sometimes, but mostly it's just who I am now." He glanced at the children. "What about you? Always being the CEO, the decision maker, the one who fixes everything?" The question hit closer to home than she expected. "Touché." A small smile touched his lips. "Maybe we're not so different, you and I." The observation hung between them, neither challenging nor confrontational, simply an acknowledgement of a truth they were both beginning to recognize. Later, after the children had been put to bed and Noah had fallen asleep on the guest room cot, Catherine found Mason on the back terrace. The night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city's glow. He stood with his hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "You should go home," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the chill. "Get some real rest." "In a bit." He didn't look at her. "I wanted to make sure everything was settled first." Catherine moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the darkened landscape. "Thank you for today, for all of it, really. Just doing my job." "No," she said firmly. "It's more than that, and we both know it." He turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Does that bother you?" The question was layered with meaning, with potential complications neither of them had acknowledged. Catherine considered deflecting, falling back on the professional distance she typically maintained. But something about the night, about the day's revelations, about the man standing before her, demanded honesty. "It should," she admitted, "but it doesn't." Mason studied her face as if memorizing the contours of this moment. "Catherine, there's something you should know." Before he could finish, her phone buzzed insistently. The screen showed her CFO's number. "I'm sorry, I have to take this." The call was brief but devastating. The financial trail they'd been following had led to something far worse than embezzlement. Hidden in encrypted files on Victor's company server, they'd found evidence of a sophisticated operation trafficking in stolen data, and disturbing references to an organization that exploited vulnerable children. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. "I have to go back in, right now." Mason straightened, instantly alert to her distress. "What happened?" "Victor, it's worse than we thought." She struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal too much of the horror she'd just learned. "Much worse. I'm coming with you." "No," she said quickly. "The children need you here. I'll take security. This is a company matter." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to the tone he used when absolute attention was required. "Catherine, listen to me. Victor Lawrence isn't just stealing from your company. He's part of the network I've been tracking. The same one connected to the break-in." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been working with federal investigators for months. That's why I took the job here in the first place. We suspected someone at Westwood Global was using the company's resources to support a trafficking operation. Catherine felt the ground shift beneath her. You are using me, my company, my children. No. His denial was immediate and fierce. The job was real. Everything that's happened since has been real. But yes, I was placed here as part of an investigation. And now, if you're seeing what I think you're seeing, we need to move carefully. Victor is dangerous. She stepped back, anger and betrayal warring with the logical part of her brain that recognized the truth in his words. Why should I trust you now, when you've been lying to me from the start? Because despite everything, you know I would never let anything happen to your children. Or to you. His gaze held hers, unwavering. And because right now, I'm the only one who knows exactly what we're dealing with. The standoff lasted several heartbeats, the night air crackling with tension. Finally, Catherine made her decision. The children, I'll call Daniel. He can be here in 20 minutes. The house will be secure. She nodded once. Then we go together. As they prepared to leave, Catherine felt a curious calm descend. The betrayal still stung, the revelation of Mason's true purpose still unsettled her. But beneath it all was a certainty she couldn't ignore. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. The Westwood Global Tower stood like a sentinel against the night sky, its upper floors still illuminated despite the late hour. Security waved them through with minimal fuss. Catherine was a familiar sight, even on weekends, and Mason's presence beside her raised no eyebrows. As they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Catherine briefed Mason on what they knew so far: the financial discrepancies, the encrypted files, the disturbing connections. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. At least 18 months from what we can tell, possibly longer. Catherine watched the floor numbers climb. The question is, how much did he access? How much damage has he done? The elevator doors opened to a hushed office space. A small team of security specialists and financial analysts were gathered in the conference room, surrounded by screens displaying data flows and transaction records. James Chen, the company's CFO, looked up as they entered. His expression registered surprise at Mason's presence, but shifted quickly back to professional concern. We've identified 3 separate accounts, he began without preamble, all funneling into shell companies connected to a holding group called Nexus Ventures. That's one of their fronts, Mason confirmed, stepping forward. It's how they move money across borders without triggering alerts. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Catherine cleared her throat. Mr. Hall has been working with federal investigators on a related case. He has information that may be relevant. For the next hour, they pieced together a grim picture. Victor had been using Westwood Global's infrastructure to support a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The company's advanced encryption tools, designed to protect client data, had been repurposed to create secure channels for illegal transactions. The most concerning part, Chen said, pulling up a series of emails, is this communication about special packages coming through Boston next week. We believe it may reference human trafficking. Mason's expression darkened as he studied the screen. It does, and those dates align with information we've been tracking. We believe they're moving children through major port cities using legitimate shipping companies as cover. My God, Catherine whispered, the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Her company, her life's work, had been weaponized for something monstrous. Where is Victor now? Mason asked, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. Chen tapped a few keys, bringing up the building's security system. His access card was used about 40 minutes ago. 38th floor, the data center. He's clearing evidence, Mason said immediately. We need to move, now. Catherine turned to the security team. Lock down the building. No one in or out until we have him. As the team mobilized, Mason pulled her aside. This isn't just a corporate security issue anymore. This is an active federal investigation. We need to call in my contact at the Bureau. She nodded, the CEO and her making rapid calculations. Make the call, but we move now. If he's destroying evidence, every minute counts. They took a service elevator to the 38th floor, accompanied by 2 members of the security team. The data center occupied half the floor, a climate-controlled space filled with humming servers and blinking lights. His access card opened that door, one of the security officers said, pointing to a reinforced entrance at the far end. It leads to the secure storage area. Mason drew a concealed weapon from his ankle holster, earning a startled look from Catherine. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice dropping to the controlled whisper of a soldier in hostile territory. They approached the door carefully, listening for any sound from within. Mason positioned himself to one side, nodding to the security officers to cover the other approaches. "Victor Lawrence here," he called, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Federal agents are on their way. Come out now, hands visible." Silence was the only response. Mason exchanged a look with Catherine, then tried the door. It opened easily, too easily. The secure storage room beyond was in disarray. Hard drives had been removed from their bays, monitors smashed, papers scattered across the floor. And in the center of it all, a small device blinked with an ominous red light. "Everybody out!" Mason shouted, recognizing the crude but effective incendiary device. "Now!" He grabbed Catherine's arm, pulling her toward the exit as the security officers scrambled ahead of them. They had just cleared the data center door when the explosion ripped through the secure room, sending a wave of heat and pressure that knocked them to the ground. Mason covered Catherine with his body as debris rained down around them. The building's fire suppression system activated, spraying the area with foam and water. Alarms blared, emergency lights casting stark shadows across the smoke-filled space. "Are you hurt?" Mason's voice was close to her ear, urgent with concern. Catherine shook her head, coughing against the acrid smoke. "He's destroying everything." "Not everything," Mason said grimly, helping her to her feet. "The feds have been mirroring his communications for weeks, and now he's just added several federal charges to his list." They made their way to the emergency stairwell, the security officers calling in the situation as they descended. By the time they reached the lobby, emergency vehicles were already arriving, their lights painting the glass facade in pulses of red and blue. FBI agents arrived minutes later, quickly taking control of the scene. Mason's contact, Special Agent Diane Reeves, was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "We've had our eye on Lawrence for months," she told Catherine as paramedics checked them both for injuries. "But we needed concrete evidence tying him to the trafficking operation. Thanks to you and Hall, we finally have it." "He's gone," Catherine said, frustration edging her voice. "And he's destroyed evidence." "Some of it," Reeves agreed, "but not all. And now he's a fugitive, which gives us even more resources to track him down." As the night wore on, the full scope of Victor's crimes became clearer. He had been using Westwood Global's resources to support a network that trafficked in both data and human beings. The company's legitimate shipping contracts had provided cover for moving packages across borders. Its financial systems had laundered money. Its secure communications had coordinated unspeakable transactions. And all of it had happened right under Catherine's nose. By dawn, she was exhausted, her designer clothes from the previous day smoke-stained and wrinkled, her makeup long since worn away. The FBI had established a command center in the company's conference room, and agents were systematically working through the remaining evidence. Mason found her in her office, staring out at the sunrise breaking over the city skyline. He handed her a cup of coffee, steam rising from the surface. "Daniel called. The children are fine. They don't know anything's wrong." Catherine nodded, grateful for this small mercy. "And Noah?" "With them. They're having breakfast and watching cartoons." He hesitated, then added, "I told Daniel to keep them away from the news." She took a sip of the coffee. Coffee. Letting the warmth seep into her cold hands. "How long?" Mason didn't pretend to misunderstand. "How long have I been investigating, Sector?" "About 6 months." "How long have I known he was targeting your company specifically?" "Since just before I was placed here." "And the job? Was that all just a cover?" "The placement was strategic," he admitted. "But everything that's happened since with the twins, with you, that was never part of any operation." Catherine turned to face him fully, studying the man who had become so integral to her life in such a short time. He looked tired, a smudge of soot on his jaw, his eyes shadowed with the weight of the night's events, but still steady, still unwavering. "I should be furious with you," she said quietly. "I know. You used my company, my home, as part of your investigation. Yes. You put my children at risk. At this, his expression hardened. No, I would never do that. The investigation was carefully contained. Victor was the target, not your family. If anything, my presence added a layer of protection they wouldn't have had otherwise. She knew he was right, but the sense of violation remained. You should have told me. I couldn't, not without compromising the investigation. Mason set his own coffee down, leaning against the edge of her desk. But after last night, after what happened at the house with the girls, I was going to tell you everything. That's what I was about to say on the terrace when you got the call. Catherine remembered the moment, the quiet night, the stars above, the way he had looked at her as if on the verge of a confession. Why then? Why not before? Because I realized something had changed between us. His gaze held hers unwavering, and I couldn't let it go any further without you knowing the truth. The admission hung in the air between them, as significant as the explosion that had rocked the building hours before. Catherine felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The beginning of it, at least. What happens now? She asked, gesturing to the chaos beyond her office walls. The investigation continues. Victor becomes the most wanted man in several jurisdictions. Your company begins the long process of damage control. Mason's expression softened slightly. And you go home to your children, who need their mother more than this place needs its CEO right now. The simple truth of his words struck her with unexpected force. Through all the corporate crises, the security breaches, the betrayals, she had almost lost sight of what mattered most. You're right, she said, setting down her coffee. Let's go home. As they left the building, the morning sun casting long shadows across the city streets, Catherine felt the weight of the night's revelations pressing down on her. Victor's betrayal, Mason's deception, the horrible realization of what had been happening within her company, it was almost too much to process. But walking beside her was a man who had lied to her, yes, but who had also saved her children, who had brought laughter back into her home, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and never once used it against her. The contradiction was dizzying, the path forward unclear. And yet, as they drove through the awakening city toward home, toward the children waiting for them, Catherine found herself choosing to focus not on what had been hidden, but on what had been revealed. Truth, after all, was rarely simple, and trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, slowly, painfully, but perhaps stronger than before. It was a beginning, at least, and for now, that would have to be enough. In the days that followed, the Westwood estate became both sanctuary and fortress. Federal agents maintained a discreet presence at the perimeter. Security protocols were heightened, identities verified, backgrounds double-checked. For the twins, life continued in a protected bubble of routine and play, largely unaware of the storm that swirled around them. Catherine had made the difficult decision to step back temporarily from day-to-day operations at Westwood Global. The company needed stability, and she needed time. Time to process the betrayal, to cooperate with authorities, and most importantly, to be present for her daughters. They had already lost too much. She wouldn't let them lose her to the aftermath of Victor's crimes. The media coverage was relentless. Tech giant infiltrated by trafficking ring. CEO's trusted executive revealed as criminal mastermind. The stories painted Catherine alternately as victim and negligent leader, depending on the publication's bent. She avoided them all, focusing instead on what lay within her control: her home, her children, her response to crisis. Mason's role had shifted too. No longer just a security guard, he was now officially recognized as a federal asset embedded at the estate, his presence authorized by the highest levels of the investigation. The pretense was gone, but in its place remained a man whose actions had proven his character far more eloquently than any credential. It was a crisp December morning, nearly 2 weeks after the explosion at Westwood Global, when Agent Reeves arrived at the estate. Catherine received her in the sunroom, where the winter light created pools of warmth on the polished floor. Mason joined them, his posture more formal than it had been in private moments, but his eyes holding the same steady assurance. "We've located Victor's safe house in Montreal," Reeves announced without preamble. "We believe he's planning to cross into Europe within the next 72 hours. Canadian authorities are cooperating, but we need to move quickly." Catherine nodded, absorbing the information. "What do you need from me?" Nothing operationally, Machen, Reeves assured her, but there's something else you should know. She placed a file on the table between them. We've been reviewing Victor's personal communications, and we found these. The file contained printouts of surveillance photos, dozens of them, spanning back nearly 2 years. Photos of Catherine at charity events, at restaurants, entering and leaving her office. Photos of the twins at their private school, in the garden, at the park with various nannies. And most disturbing of all, photos taken through the windows of the estate itself. Intimate glimpses of family moments that should have been private. He's been watching us, Catherine whispered, a chill settling deep in her bones. It appears so, Reeves confirmed. And based on the timestamps, this surveillance predates our investigation by at least a year. Mason's jaw tightened as he studied the images. This is personal, beyond the criminal enterprise. That's our assessment as well, Reeves agreed, which is why we're concerned about potential retaliation. Victor Lawrence is cornered, his operation exposed, his freedom measured in days, if not hours. That makes him unpredictable. The children, Catherine said immediately, her mind leaping to the most vulnerable point. Are secure, Mason assured her. The estate has been hardened against physical intrusion, communications are monitored, staff have been vetted and limited. But we can't rule out the possibility that he may have contingency plans, Reeves added, possibly involving people already in your orbit. The implication hung heavy in the air. Victor had been planning this for years. Who knew how deep his network reached? How many seemingly innocent connections might harbor hidden loyalties? After Reeves departed, Catherine found herself unable to settle. The photos had shaken her more deeply than she wanted to admit. The idea that Victor, someone she had trusted, had known for years, had been watching her family with such calculated interest made her skin crawl. She wandered to the nursery where the twins were engaged in quiet play. Anna was arranging a collection of seashells in intricate patterns, while Lily leafed through a picture book, lips moving silently as she sounded out the simpler words. They looked up as she entered, faces brightening. "Mommy, look!" Anna held up her shell arrangement. "It's a flower garden." Catherine knelt beside her, examining the delicate spiral pattern. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Uncle M showed me how. He said sailors used to bring shells home to remember the ocean." The casual mention of Mason, the easy way he had become woven into their daily vocabulary, struck Catherine anew. In the midst of crisis, while she had been struggling with betrayal and corporate damage control, he had been here, teaching her daughters about seashells and memory. Lily closed her book, looking up with solemn eyes. Is the bad man coming back? The question caught Catherine off guard. What bad man, sweetie? The one who was in our house, the one Uncle M fought with. So they knew more than she'd realized. Catherine chose her words carefully. No, he's not coming back. There are a lot of good people making sure of that. Like Uncle M? Anna asked, abandoning her shells to join the conversation. Yes, like Uncle M. Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. He said he wouldn't let anything bad happen to us. He promised. And he's a man who keeps his promises, Catherine said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, Catherine found Mason in the security office reviewing the day's logs. He looked up as she entered, immediately alert to her presence. I've been thinking, she began, closing the door behind her, about what Agent Reeves said, about Victor's surveillance being personal. Mason nodded, waiting for her to continue. The timing, she said, sinking into the chair opposite him. It started around 2 years ago, right after Robert died. You think there's a connection? Catherine exhaled slowly. Victor and we dated briefly in college. It ended amicably, or so I thought. We maintained a professional relationship. He even attended our wedding. She paused, gathering memories that suddenly appeared in a different light. When Robert's company was struggling, Victor was the one who suggested the merger with my firm. He was instrumental in bringing Robert into Westwood Global. Mason leaned forward, his expression intent. And after Robert's death, how did Victor behave? Supportive, almost too supportive. Catherine's mind raced through interactions she had previously dismissed. He was always there, offering to help with the transition, with the children, with everything. And you refused? Not immediately, but eventually, yes. I needed space to grieve, to find my footing again. She met Mason's gaze directly. You think his criminal activities are connected to some kind of, what, rejected romantic interest? I think men like Victor don't compartmentalize their obsessions, Mason replied carefully. Whatever his feelings for you, they likely became entangled with his criminal ambitions. The surveillance suggests he wanted control, access, intimate knowledge of your life. When he couldn't get that legitimately, he took it anyway. Catherine finished, the realization settling cold and heavy in her stomach. And now that he's exposed, cornered, he might lash out at what he believes was taken from him. Mason's voice was gentle but firm. You, the children, the life he imagined having. The weight of this possibility pressed down on Catherine like a physical force. She had been viewing Victor as a criminal, a betrayer of trust, a threat to her company. But this was different, more intimate, more dangerous. What do we do? She asked, hating the threat of fear in her voice but unable to suppress it entirely. We prepare, Mason answered simply. We assume he'll make a move, and we ensure that when he does, we're ready. The certainty in his tone steadied her. This was the soldier speaking, the man who had faced worse threats and survived. She found herself drawing strength from his calm, from the quiet competence that had become her anchor in the storm. Okay, she said, straightening her shoulders. Tell me how. The plan they developed was comprehensive. Additional security measures, limited public appearances, careful screening of all communications. Catherine broke the news to the twins that they would be staying home from school until after the holidays, framing it as a special treat rather than a precaution. Noah joined them most days, the children forming a tight-knit unit that seemed to draw strength from each other. Christmas approached with a surreal mixture of tension and normalcy. Catherine insisted on maintaining traditions, the tree, the decorations, the baking of cookies that had been Robert's favorite ritual. Mason watched these preparations with a quiet appreciation, occasionally offering a hand but mostly giving the family space to find their footing in this strange new reality. 3 days before Christmas, the call came. Agent Reeves, her voice tight with a controlled urgency. Lawrence slipped our surveillance in Montreal. We believe he's back in the country. The news sent a ripple of heightened alert through the estate. Security was doubled. The perimeter tightened. Mason moved into the guest suite permanently, his presence a constant reassurance, even as it underscored the danger. That evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine found him on the terrace, his gaze sweeping the darkened grounds with practiced vigilance. She joined him, wrapping her cardigan tightly against the December chill. They're tracking his possible movements, she said, picking up a conversation they had had earlier. But it could be days before they locate him. Mason nodded, his profile etched against the night sky. We've accounted for every contingency. The estate is secure. But you're still worried. He turned to her then, his expression softening slightly. It's my job to worry, to anticipate threats before they materialize. And what is your instinct telling you about this one? Mason was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. That Victor is too intelligent to attempt a direct assault, that he'll look for weaknesses, for gaps in our defenses, and that his ultimate target isn't the company or even your reputation. It's me, Catherine said softly. Me and the girls. Yes, there was no point in pretense between them anymore. But he won't get near them. I promise you that. The fierceness in his voice warmed her, despite the cold night air. Catherine found herself moving closer, drawn to the solid certainty of his presence. Mason, she began, unsure of what she wanted to say but needing to speak nonetheless. After all this is over. He turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the soft glow from the house behind them. After, he agreed, the word a promise in itself, the moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, Mason reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so light it might have been imagined. We should get inside, he said softly. It's getting colder. As they turned toward the warmth of the house, neither noticed the shadow that moved briefly at the edge of the property, there and gone so quickly it might have been a trick of the light. Christmas Eve dawned bright and clear, the morning sun glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The children's excitement was contagious, their joy a powerful antidote to the tension that had gripped the adults. They spent the morning baking, flour dusting countertops and noses, laughter filling the kitchen that had once been the exclusive domain of staff. By afternoon, preparations for the small celebration were complete. Catherine had invited only their closest circle, Daniel and his wife, Mrs. Prescott, who had softened considerably toward Mason in recent weeks, and Claire, whose loyalty during the corporate crisis had proven invaluable. It looks like something from a magazine, Claire marveled as she took in the decorated great room. A massive pine tree stood in the corner, adorned with ornaments that spanned generations of the Westwood family. Garlands of evergreen draped the mantelpiece, and candles cast a warm glow throughout the space. The twins did most of it, Catherine admitted, watching as Anna proudly showed Noah how to hang a particularly delicate glass angel. They seem different, Claire observed, happier. Catherine followed her gaze to where Lily was explaining something to Mason with great seriousness, her small hands gesturing emphatically as he listened with complete attention. They are, she agreed softly. We all are. The evening unfolded with the kind of warmth that had been absent from the Westwood estate for too long. Dinner was served not in the formal dining room, but at a table set up in the great room, near the tree and the crackling fire. The adults conversed easily, the children interjected with innocent observations, and for a few precious hours the shadow of Victor Lawrence receded to the edges of consciousness. After dinner, as tradition dictated, the twins were allowed to open one gift each. They tore into the packages with delighted abandon, revealing matching telescopes that Catherine had selected weeks earlier. For stargazing, she explained as they examined the instruments with wonder. Your father loved the stars. He used to say they were like a map of possibilities. Can we try them tonight? Anna asked, already turning toward the terrace doors. It's pretty cold out there, Catherine hesitated. I can take them, Mason offered. Just for a few minutes. The sky is exceptionally clear. The children's pleading faces made resistance impossible. Catherine nodded her agreement, helping them bundle into coats and scarves while Mason collected his own jacket. Stay within sight of the house, she instructed, maternal caution overriding her knowledge of the security measures in place. We won't go past the terrace, Mason assured her, shepherding the excited children toward the doors. From inside, Catherine watched as they set up the telescopes, Mason kneeling to help adjust the height, pointing out constellations visible even to the naked eye. The scene filled her with a poignant mixture of joy and melancholy, happiness at her children's delight, sadness that Robert wasn't there to share it, and a new emotion she wasn't quite ready to name when she looked at Mason. She was so absorbed in the tableau that she almost missed the subtle shift in the room behind her. A barely perceptible change in air pressure, the faintest scent of unfamiliar cologne. By the time she registered the wrongness, it was too late. They make a beautiful picture, don't they? Victor's voice was as smooth as she remembered, but with an undercurrent she had never noticed before. The perfect family. Catherine turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. He stood near the hallway entrance, impeccably dressed as always, a small pistol held casually at his side. The room had emptied, the other guests drawn away by some pretext she hadn't noticed. Victor. She kept her voice steady, her eyes darting briefly to the security panel near the door. No alarm had been triggered. He had found a way around the system. Catherine. He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. You've been avoiding my calls. You're a wanted criminal, she replied, fighting to keep her voice level. Of course I have. He shrugged elegantly. Semantics, criminal, visionary, disruptor. It's all about perspective, isn't it? And speaking of perspective, he gestured toward the terrace where Mason and the children remained, oblivious to the danger inside. I must say I'm disappointed in your taste. From respected executive to common soldier? That's quite a step down. Catherine's mind raced, calculating options, escape routes, ways to alert Mason without endangering the children. What do you want, Victor? Originally, to build something extraordinary with you. A partnership in every sense. He moved further into the room, each step measured and precise. We could have been unstoppable together. Your vision, my connections, our shared history. Our history ended in college, Catherine said firmly, taking a subtle step toward the fireplace where the heavy poker might serve as a weapon. Did it? I don't think so. Victor's voice hardened. I was there, Catherine, when your company was struggling, when Robert needed a lifeline. I was the one who brought him into your world. Because you cared about the company, because I cared about you. The admission seemed to cost him something, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing his face before the mask slipped back into place. Everything I've done has been for you, in one way or another, including trafficking innocent children? The disgust in her voice was impossible to hide. Victor waved dismissively. Business, a particularly lucrative segment of a diverse portfolio. Nothing personal. It was all personal, Victor. The surveillance, the photos, infiltrating my company, my home. Catherine took another small step toward the fireplace. You didn't do any of this for me. You did it to possess me. His expression hardened. And I would have succeeded if not for your pet soldier, the hero with the troubled past in the savior complex. Victor's gaze shifted to the terrace doors. Tell me, does he make you feel safe, Catherine? Protected? Does he fill the void Robert left behind? The taunt struck closer to home than she wanted to admit. Leave Mason out of this. Whatever grievance you have is with me. Oh, I disagree. Victor raised the pistol slightly. He made himself part of this the moment he stepped into my operation, the moment he stepped into your life. He glanced at his watch, a brief smile touching his lips. But we won't have to worry about him much longer. Cold dread washed through Catherine. What have you done? Let's just say I've arranged a distraction, something to keep your guard dog occupied while you and I conclude our business. Victor gestured toward the foyer with his free hand. Shall we? I have a car waiting and a plane standing by. By morning, we'll be somewhere beyond the reach of federal jurisdiction. I'm not going anywhere with you, Catherine said, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her chest. And neither are my children. The children? Victor looked genuinely surprised. I have no interest in Robert's offspring. They were never part of the equation. The casual dismissal of her daughters, as if they were mere accessories to her life rather than its center, ignited something fierce in Catherine's chest. This man, who claimed to care for her, couldn't even see what mattered most to her. Then you never knew me at all, she said, her voice low and controlled. Because they are everything. Outside, a sudden commotion erupted. Shouts, the sound of running feet. Victor's attention wavered for a crucial second, his gaze shifting to the terrace doors. Catherine seized the moment, lunging for the fireplace poker. She had it in her grasp, the cold metal heavy and reassuring when Victor recovered. He moved with unexpected speed, closing the distance between them before she could bring the makeshift weapon to bear. The struggle was brief but violent. Catherine fought with the desperate strength of a mother protecting her children, landing a glancing blow to Victor's shoulder before he wrenched the poker from her grasp. It clattered to the floor as he seized her wrist, the pistol now pressed against her side. Enough, he hissed, his composure finally cracking. We're leaving, now. He began forcing her toward the foyer, keeping the gun hidden between their bodies. Catherine resisted, dragging her feet, buying precious seconds. The commotion outside had intensified, voices calling, footsteps on the terrace. Whatever distraction Victor had planned seemed to be backfiring. They had almost reached the foyer when the terrace doors burst open. Mason stood framed in the doorway, his expression shifting from concern to deadly focus as he took in the scene before him. Let her go, Lawrence, he said, his voice deceptively calm. It's over. Victor tightened his grip on Catherine's arm, the gun digging painfully into her ribs. Back off, soldier. This doesn't concern you. I'm afraid it does. Mason took a measured step forward, his gaze never leaving Victor's face. Federal agents have the property surrounded. Your associates outside have been neutralized. There's no way out. For a fraction of a second, doubt flickered across Victor's features. Then his resolve hardened. There's always a way out, and she's coming with me. No, I'm not, Catherine said firmly, meeting Mason's eyes. In that brief exchange of glance, a plan formed, unspoken but clear between them. She let her body go suddenly limp, dropping her weight against Victor's grip. The unexpected movement threw him off balance, the gun momentarily shifting away from her body. It was all the opening Mason needed. He moved with the fluid precision of a trained fighter, covering the distance between them in 2 long strides. Victor fired wildly, the shot going wide as Mason caught his wrist, forcing the weapon upward. Catherine tore free, scrambling away from the struggle. The two men grappled fiercely, Victor's corporate polish giving way to surprisingly vicious street fighting. He landed a hard blow to Mason's jaw, but the veteran absorbed it without faltering, his focus unwavering as he worked to disarm his opponent. A second shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down as they crashed into an antique side table, sending a vase shattering across the marble floor. Catherine backed toward the terrace doors, her only thought to reach her children, to ensure they were safe from the violence unfolding in her home. But before she could reach them, the front doors burst open, admitting a team of federal agents led by Agent Reeves. The cavalry had arrived, but they were moments too late to prevent what happened next. Victor, seeing his escape routes cut off, his leverage lost, made a final desperate play. Breaking free from Mason's grip, he raised the pistol one last time, not toward Mason, not toward the advancing agents, but toward Catherine. "If I can't have you," he snarled, all pretense of sophistication stripped away, "no one will." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mason lunging forward, his body intercepting the space between Catherine and the gun. The deafening crack of the pistol firing, Mason's body jerking with the impact, but still moving forward, driving Victor to the ground with devastating force. Federal agents swarmed the room, securing Victor, calling for medical assistance. Catherine barely registered their presence. She was already moving toward Mason, who had pushed himself to his knees beside the now subdued Victor. "Mason!" She reached him just as he swayed, one hand pressed to his left shoulder, where blood was already seeping through his shirt. "You're hit." "It's nothing," he said, though the tightness in his voice belied the claim. "The kids are safe," Agent Reeves assured them, appearing at Catherine's side. "We have them in the kitchen with Noah. Daniel is with them." Relief washed over Mason's face, followed quickly by a grimace of pain as the adrenaline began to ebb. Catherine supported him as medical personnel rushed in, helping him to a nearby chair where they could examine the wound. "It's a through and through," the paramedic announced after a quick assessment. "Clean exit wound. He'll need surgery to repair the tissue damage, but no vital organs were hit." "Lucky," Mason muttered, his complexion pale but his eyes still alert. "Not luck," Catherine said firmly, gripping his uninjured hand. "Skill and courage." Across the room, federal agents were leading Victor away in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his failure and the loss of his carefully constructed facade. As he passed, he paused, his gaze locking with Catherine's one final time. "It could have been perfect," he said, a last attempt at manipulation. Catherine looked from him to Mason, who had risked everything to protect her family, who had brought light back into her home not through grand gestures, but through simple presence and unwavering integrity. "No," she said with quiet certainty, "it never could have been." As Victor was led away, Catherine turned her attention back to Mason, who was now being prepared for transport to the hospital. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "The children will understand that Uncle M needs me right now." She squeezed his hand. "Daniel and Claire will stay with them until we get back." Mason studied her face, seeing the determination there, and nodded once. "Okay." As the paramedics wheeled him toward the waiting ambulance, Catherine walked alongside, her hand never leaving his. Behind them, federal agents secured the scene, staff began cleaning up the destruction, and somewhere in the kitchen, 3 children waited anxiously for news of the adults who anchored their world. The night had shattered the last vestiges of the careful boundaries Catherine had constructed around her life. But in that shattering, something new had emerged, something stronger and more honest than what had come before. The hospital corridor was quiet, the late-night hours bringing a hush to even this busy urban medical center. Catherine sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the surgical suite, her evening gown incongruous in the clinical setting, her thoughts a tumult of fear and gratitude. Mason had been in surgery for over an hour, a procedure the doctors had assured her was routine for this type of injury, but which felt interminable as she waited alone with her thoughts. Agent Reeves had come and gone, providing updates on Victor's processing and the dismantling of his network. Claire had called twice with reassurances about the children. They were worried but calm, having been told a simplified version of events that emphasized Mason's bravery without dwelling on the danger. Now, in the stillness of the hospital corridor, Catherine found herself confronting truths she had been avoiding for weeks, perhaps months. The truth about Mason, whose presence in her life had begun as a calculated placement but had evolved into something essential. The truth about herself, about the walls she had built after Robert's death, walls that had kept out pain but also connection. And the truth about what comes after loss, not replacement, but renewal, the possibility of a different kind of happiness. Ms. Westwood? She looked up to find a surgeon standing before her, still in scrubs but with his mask removed. The procedure went well. We've repaired the tissue damage and given him a transfusion to replace the blood loss. He's in recovery now. When can I see him? He'll be moved to a private room shortly. You can see him then, though he'll be groggy from the anesthesia. Catherine nodded her thanks, relief washing through her in a dizzying wave. Mason would recover. The children were safe. Victor was in custody. The immediate dangers had passed. But as she sat there waiting to be allowed into Mason's room, she realized that the greatest challenge still lay ahead. The challenge of what came next, of how to rebuild a life that honored what had been lost while embracing what had been found. When she was finally escorted to Mason's room, she found him pale but alert, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV dripping fluids and medication into his right arm. His eyes found hers immediately as she entered, a smile touching his lips despite the evident pain. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from the intubation during surgery. "Where else would I be?" She moved to the bedside, taking his free hand in both of hers. "The kids are fine," she assured him. "Safe. Worried about you." He relaxed slightly, some of the tension leaving his features. "Victor?" "In federal custody. Agent Reeves says they're building an airtight case. Multiple jurisdictions, multiple charges. He won't see daylight for decades, if ever." Mason nodded, satisfied with this information. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment, his gaze holding hers, "for how this all began, for not being completely honest with you from the start." Catherine considered his words, weighing them against everything that had happened since that first night she'd found him sleeping on the nursery floor with her daughters. "I've been thinking about that," she said slowly, "about honesty and deception, about what we show the world versus what we hold inside." She looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers but equally capable of gentleness. "You may not have told me everything about why you came into our lives, Mason, but I think you've shown me who you truly are in every moment since." "And who is that?" he asked quietly. "A man who sleeps on the floor to keep children from waking alone, who folds battle flags from napkins to teach courage, who steps in front of a bullet without hesitation." Her voice caught slightly on the last words. "A man I've come to care for very deeply." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. Mason's fingers tightened around hers. "Catherine," he began, but she shook her head, needing to finish. "I don't know what happens next," she continued. "I don't know how to navigate this, whatever this is becoming. But I know that when I thought I might lose you tonight, it felt like losing a part of myself, a part I didn't even know was there until you came into our lives." Mason's eyes never left her face, taking in every nuance of her expression. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "Not unless you want me to." "I don't," she whispered, the words both admission and promise. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until she was perched on the edge of the hospital bed. With careful movements that respected his injury, she leaned down, bringing her face close to his. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a beginning rather than a culmination, sweet with the promise of more to come. When they parted, Mason reached up with his good hand to touch her cheek, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. "Stay," he said softly. And she did. Through the night and into the dawn, her hand in his, the future unfolding before them, not as a certainty but as a possibility worth fighting for. Spring came to the Westwood estate in a riot of color and new beginnings. The ornamental garden, long maintained but rarely enjoyed, became the center of family life as the weather warmed. The twins, now more outgoing than anyone would have thought possible a year earlier, spent hours exploring the grounds with Noah, their trio having evolved into an inseparable unit. Mason's recovery had been steady, but not without setbacks. Physical therapy had restored most of the function to his left arm, though on damp days the shoulder still ached, a permanent reminder of that Christmas Eve confrontation. He had officially resigned from federal service, accepting instead a position heading security for the Westwood Foundation, the new nonprofit Catherine had established to support children affected by trafficking and exploitation. The foundation had become Catherine's passion, a way to transform the trauma of Victor's betrayal into something healing and hopeful. Westwood Global continued under the leadership of a trusted deputy, with Catherine serving as chairwoman, but no longer involved in day-to-day operations. Her priorities had shifted, the balance between work and family finding a new equilibrium that felt right in a way her previous life never had. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in May, Catherine stood on the terrace watching as Mason helped the children plant a vegetable garden in a sunny corner of the property. His patience was endless, showing them how to measure the proper spacing between seedlings, explaining the difference between various plants, answering their rapid-fire questions with thoughtful consideration. Noah, now a semi-permanent resident of the estate, was proving to have a natural green thumb. Lily followed his lead with serious concentration, while Anna approached the project with her characteristic enthusiastic chaos. Mason moved between them, offering guidance without controlling, support without hovering. Catherine smiled as she observed the scene, remembering a conversation they'd had months earlier, when Mason was still recovering and their relationship was taking its first tentative steps beyond friendship. "I don't want to replace Robert," he had said one evening, his voice low and serious in the firelit study. "Not for you, and certainly not for the girls. He was their father. He'll always be their father." "I know," she had assured him, touched by his understanding. "That's not what I'm asking of you. Not what any of us are asking." "What are you asking, then?" His eyes had searched hers, seeking clarity. "For you to be you," she had said simply. "For you to be Mason. The man who sees them, who listens, who teaches them about battle flags and courage, and standing tall even when they're afraid. The man who's already changed our lives just by being in them." Now, watching him in the garden, Catherine knew they had found their way forward, not by forgetting the past or erasing what had been lost, but by honoring it while still embracing the present. Robert would always be a beloved presence in their hearts, just as Mason's late wife Sarah lived on, in the gentle way he sometimes looked at the horizon, remembering. Their blended family wasn't a replacement for what had been, but something new and equally precious. Different, but no less real for its differences. As if sensing her thoughts, Mason looked up, finding her on the terrace. The smile he gave her still made her heart quicken, still felt like a gift she hadn't quite earned but treasured nonetheless. He said something to the children, then made his way across the lawn to join her. Supervising from a distance, he teased as he reached her, brushing a kiss against her temple. Appreciating from a distance, she corrected, leaning into his solid warmth. "You're good with them. They make it easy." His arms slipped around her waist, comfortable and familiar. Noah was asking about summer plans. "I think he's angling for a beach trip." "That sounds perfect, actually. The rental in Cape Cod is still available for August." Mason nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking, it might be time to look for something more permanent. For Noah and me." Catherine turned to face him fully, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "The apartment in the city," he explained. "The lease is up next month. And with me being here most of the time anyway." "You want to find a place closer to the estate?" Catherine asked, trying to understand. Mason's smile was warm but tinged with nervousness she rarely saw in him. "Actually, I was thinking of a place even closer than that." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "If you'll have us." Catherine's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a ring that was both elegant and understated, a perfect reflection of how well he had come to know her. "Mason," she whispered, emotions swelling in her chest. "I love you, Catherine," he said simply. "I love the life we've been building. I love our family, yours, mine, ours, and I want to make it official." He took her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "Will you marry me?" Before she could answer, a chorus of excited squeals erupted from the garden. The children had abandoned their planting to watch the scene unfolding on the terrace, their faces alight with joy and anticipation. "I think we have an audience," Mason said with a soft laugh. Catherine looked from him to the children, Anna jumping up and down with excitement, Lily clutching Noah's hand, Noah grinning broadly, and felt her heart expand with a happiness so complete it was almost painful. "Yes," she said, turning back to Mason with tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes to you, yes to us, yes to everything." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into an embrace, the children raced across the lawn toward them, eager to be part of the moment. They collided in a group hug of tangled arms and breathless laughter, the five of them forming a circle of belonging that transcended blood and circumstance. "Does this mean you'll be our dad now?" Anna asked Mason, her directness as endearing as ever. Mason knelt to the children's level, his expression serious. "I'll be your Mason," he said gently, "your stepdad who loves you very much. Your dad will always be your dad, in your hearts and in your memories." Lily considered this with solemn eyes. "But we can still call you Uncle M?" "You can call me whatever feels right to you," he assured her, "and the name isn't what matters. What matters is that we're family." Noah, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "And we'll all live together for real?" Catherine knelt beside Mason, bringing herself to the children's height. "Yes, for real, all of us, together." The joy on the children's faces was answer enough, a validation of the path they had chosen, the family they had forged not from obligation, but from love freely given and gratefully received. Later that evening, after the children had finally gone to sleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Catherine and Mason stood on the terrace under a sky dusted with stars. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him, the ring on her finger catching the soft light from the house behind them. "I never expected this," she said quietly. "After Robert died, I thought that part of my life was over, that the best I could hope for was to be a good mother, a successful CEO, a person defined by what I did rather than who I loved." "And now?" Mason asked, his voice a gentle rumble against her ear. "Now I know better." She turned in his arms to face him. "Now I know that life doesn't follow the paths we expect, that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the deepest losses. That family isn't just who we're born to, but who we choose to build a life with." Mason touched her face, his eyes reflecting the starlight and something deeper, something uniquely his own. "When I came here, I was looking for evidence, for a way to bring down a criminal. I never imagined I'd find a home." "Floors, not walls," Catherine said softly, remembering a conversation from months before. "Exactly." His smile was tender as he pulled her closer. "Floors to stand on together, not walls to keep us apart." As they sealed the promise with a kiss, the Westwood estate stood sentinel around them, no longer a showcase of wealth and privilege, but a true home where a family had found its way through loss and betrayal to something genuine and lasting. The floors between them, once cold and formal, had become a foundation for a life built on trust, on honesty, on the kind of love that doesn't erase the past but honors it while still moving forward. A love that understands that the greatest strength isn't in standing alone, but in standing together, through whatever storms might come, whatever challenges might arise. A love that knows in the end that it's not the grandeur of the house that matters, but the heart of the home within.